Hello and welcome to the interview on France 24. We all remember that moment. It was history in the making when some 65 million Americans voted for change in the midst of the worst recession in a lifetime. 1 year on from his election, how would you rate Barack Obama's presidency? That's the question I'll be asking my guest today. He's a professor of economics at New York University who's been credited with long predicting the global financial crisis that earned him the nickname of Dr. Doom. Nouriel Roubini, thank you for speaking to us here at France 24. You're here in Paris to attend the Atlantic dinners tonight, I guess.
Yes, it'll be a pleasure being here.
So some say your relentless criticism of the Bush administration and the fact that you were actually the first major economists to foresee the global financial crisis with such scary precision helped Barack Obama get elected. Do you take that as a compliment?
Well, you know, I'm trying to be non-partisan. The critique was not necessarily of the Bush administration, but of mistaken policies. And, you know, the American public decided to elect a new president and having a fresh start and a change, and I think that was appropriate.
What was your reaction on the night of November 4th, 2008?
I think my reaction, like the one of many others, was a sense that maybe there'll be a new beginning, that we had made many policy mistakes, both in terms of economic and financial policy and also of foreign policy, and there was time to have a kind of like a fresh, clean slate in terms of changing those kind of policies. There was a sense of lack of confidence, of malaise, of financial meltdown, and things have changed since then.
So Obama wins the election in November and pledges to change the way things get done in Washington. Then he gets sworn in January. And all of a sudden he surrounds himself with the old guard Clintonites, people like Larry Summers, of course Robert Rubin, also Tim Geithner, people whom you've worked with, but they've also been accused of having laid the ground for this financial crisis we're in now back in the 90s by contributing to build this financial bubble. What do you think? Is that the real change that people can believe in?
Well, we needed change, but we also needed some steady hands at the helm. And you have to give credit to people like Larry Summers and Tim Geithner and others that the policy that have been implemented right now, like, for example, a fiscal stimulus, like what the Fed has done, like the supporting in a moderate way the financial system, like helping households that have trouble with their mortgages, that we did stabilize the real economy. Mistakes were made in the past, not only by these individuals, but more importantly by these laissez-faire approach to regulation supervision during the Bush years. You cannot blame what happened in the 90s on the policy mistakes were done in the 2000s, in my view. If you have to find the people who are culprits, that are closer culprits than them. And you have to give credit to these people that, you know, not every policy they've done is perfect, and I've been actually critical of some of the specific policy actions, but aggressive policy response by policymakers like Bernanke, like Tim Geithner, like Larry Summers, and also globally. US did it, Europe, Japan, China, India, emerging markets. There was a concerted global economic effort to do monetary stimulus, fiscal stimulus, help the financial system, and we were able to avoid the free fall of the global economy. We were able to avoid another Great Depression, and now there is a beginning of an anemic, slow growth, but at least there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So you can criticize the policymakers, and I've been the first one, but you also have to give them credit that finally they looked into the abyss, finally they got religion, and finally they started to use all the policy weapons in their policy arsenals, guns, bazookas, missiles, rockets, you name it, to avoid another mess.
Well, let's go back to the bank bailout plan for a moment, the Troubled Asset Relief Program. The original idea was to buy up toxic assets from banks through reverse auctions, but well, this idea quickly seemed almost impossible to implement, and so it seems that the whole plan reversed to another idea, actually a minor provision in the bill itself, which enabled the government to directly inject cash in the banks. Do you understand why the Treasury Department didn't change course and instead just try to pass its own bill, maybe something different, or just go for a full-fledged nationalization as you advocated sometimes before?
Well, the initial TARP was misguided because when banks don't have enough capital, the first thing that you need to do is to provide them with that capital, and if the private sector was not willing, then you need a public injection of capital. That's why the original TARP was turned into something different. In my view, that was an appropriate policy actions, but at the margin, I mean, favor of helping banks that are illiquid but solvent. I worry about some of the banks being actually insolvent, becoming zombie banks, and some of these excessive support of the financial system may actually create damage down the line. So, of course, what you do is not black and white. You want to deal with different banks in different ways, and in my view, a more radical takeover, even temporary nationalization of insolvent banks would have been appropriate. That has not been the course of action taken, in part because of political reasons, and now we'll see whether the plan that has been chosen is going to be successful or not.
Well, the latest numbers we've got about the U.S. growth in the latest quarter seem to point to a pretty strong recovery. Are you surprised?
No, I'm not surprised. For the third and the fourth quarter, I expected that the growth is going to be 3% plus, it turned out to be 3.5% for the third quarter, but that's all temporary stuff. We have the monetary and the fiscal stimulus. We've had this cash for clunker program that stole demand for car from the future, and firms that really cut back production because they had too much inventories now are destocking less or starting to restock inventories. But if you think about each one of these elements, is transitory. So for 2 quarters you can have 3% growth. The question is what's growth going to be 2010, 11, and for those years I see the fundamental weaknesses and the financial imbalances implying slow growth, below trend, anemic, say potential is at 3% the US, growth in a 1.5% range. It will be actually very poor and dismal because it implies unemployment rate going well above 10% and then staying high for a long period of time.
Meanwhile, U.S. taxpayers are still on the hook with a second bank bailout to the tune of some $2 trillion, a $787 billion fiscal stimulus, and also a mortgage relief program worth about $300 billion. And still, you said this is probably not enough. The U.S. might need another set of fiscal stimulus measures. Is that still the case with this recovery that seems to be taking hold, though, in the past quarter, and also the budget deficit reaching an all-time high in the U.S.?
You're absolutely right that budget deficits are reaching an all-time high, but next year is an election year. There are midterm election in Congress, and with a weak economy, in my view, the pressure politically to do even more fiscal stimulus is going to be there. You know, you have millions of unemployed people who are going to lose their unemployment benefits. We'll have to extend them. There is a fiscal hole of $200 billion among the state and local government. We have to help them. This tax credit for home buyers might be extended. We might do another cash for clunkers kind of program. We might have to do another round of infrastructure projects that are labor intensive. Now you do each one of these little mini fiscal stimuluses, they kind of add up, and I think many of them are going to occur, especially in an election year. That means that the budget deficit is going to remain high and higher than otherwise.